Well, I'd like to echo Robert's thanks. It really is wonderful at the end of what is often a very hard week for people, that when you just want to subside at home, that you've actually... thank you for coming at the end of what may be a very hard week, when your natural inclination is to want to go home, put your feet up, and here you are, and the subject is war. So, it's not obvious that this is something a lot of people would want to do, but the people in this room are special people, not your rank and file. And one question you might be asking, given that the subject is war, is why on earth am I standing up here talking on this subject? And there are essentially two reasons. One is I'm an advocate, as many in the room are, of critical thinking. This is why we're here, isn't it? We like poring over information. We're information junkies, and we particularly, I think, enjoy reading between the lines. Am I correct? And seeing really what the frigging hell is going on. So that's one reason I'm here, because I have to confess to being an information junkie and enjoy doing all of that. And the second reason I'm here is because, again, in common with others in the room, I come from a family where members of my family fought in the Second World War. And I was very aware of this growing up as a child in this family. So there were no fewer than 5 members of my family who went out to fight in the Second World War. My father was one of 3 brothers who fought, and my mother, she was herself a concert pianist, and she was very active in doing her bit for the war. She played the piano. She thought that would raise spirits in about 1,000 army bases and munition factories. And quite proud of the fact that she spread music in those diabolical places. But moreover, she had 2 brothers who also served, this time in the RAF. And one of her brothers volunteered, younger, I think, than he needed to, at the age of 19. And he volunteered to train in the RAF, and he was sent out to Canada for his training. And he never returned. He was killed at the age of 19 in flight training. And I have seen pictures of this man who would have been my uncle, obviously a brilliant man. He'd achieved his LLB by the age of 19. He had the whole of his future ahead of him, and now he lies alone in Ontario, a long, long way away from the family that came after him. And I'll never forget what my mother said, that when the telegram arrived, she could always still feel the paper in her hands, what it felt like to receive the news about her young brother being killed and no longer with her. And she said her mother never recovered from the shock. And so these are the 2 reasons, essentially, I'm here. We're here to talk about this subject of war. If you forgive me, I'll sit down because my back is not of the best. And of course, why are we here to talk about war? You might be saying, although probably not if you're very attentive to what's going on. We all know that a snap election has been called for the 4th of July. And who knows, there may be similar snap elections across Europe as well. The public is not being given a lot of time, are they, to think about this? And maybe that's by design, not accident. And a couple of weeks ago, you may have seen this as well, the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, I heard him say that, quotes, national security is the most important issue of our time. Is it? That said a lot. I think that he actually said that. And then many of you will have seen a video, an interview of Andrew Bridgen, the independent MP up in North Leicester. And he delivered 2 very interesting pieces of information, to say the least. what Andrew Bridgen said was that Keir Starmer had announced that Labour would go into a defence pact with the European Union. And according to Andrew Bridgen, there is only one of those pacts, and that's the European Defence and Security Union. And he went on to say, and I listened to it several times because what he was saying was so extraordinary, he said that this would give the European Union full control of Britain's army, air force, MI5, MI6, and GCHQ. And he also said, this is the second bombshell, really, excuse the pun, that the EU is currently selling war bonds for war against Russia. And he said that we are already at war, according to the Russian ambassador. And so, yes, I think the hounds of war are baying already. And Viktor Orban, last month only, insisted that the West was moving towards war against Russia and getting closer every week. According to Orban, this is a crazy mission. And you may have thoughts of your own. Perhaps you agree with Orban, and that's why you're here tonight. Orban also said, he's a little on his own, I get the sense, in the EU. He also said that instead of defending us, NATO is dragging EU member states into war. So he has a strong voice, and we need to keep listening to what he's saying, but at the same time be mindful that we could all get swept up in war so easily. And here we are, just a few weeks from the general election on 4th of July. And this issue of war is really, I think, the elephant in the room in this election. Are we hearing the main political parties sharing information on this? I see you shrugging your shoulders. No. So this is why the campaign, certainly in the short term, the campaign has the objective of getting this issue thoroughly aired and discussed. And what I'm going to do tonight is simply share with you some of the warnings that we've had delivered to us through history, so that we are very mindful of the gravity of this topic of war. And then, as Robert said, I will share with you summaries of the manifestos of the 5 main parties and what they tell us about those parties' defence policies. A lot of really interesting stuff. So, learning from the lessons of history, I don't think we could start in any better place, really, than with the World War 14-18, the Great War, they call it, not so great war, that created 40 million casualties. That was made up of 9 million deaths, 21 injured, and that included the military who lost arms, legs, nose, parts of genitalia. And why was that war waged? Why our war? This will give us great insights, perhaps, into the motivations behind wars in general. And one possible motive is financial. We'll come back to that later on in the talk. But at the time of the First World War, Margot Asquith's family, and she was the wife of the Prime Minister, had a controlling interest in Nobel Dynamite Trust. And I learnt that from this extraordinary book by Doherty and McGregor, written in 2013. And you can see a photo of that, I hope, on the slides. The title is The Secret Origins of the First World War. So that's where I learnt the fact about Margot Asquith having a controlling interest in Nobel Dynamite Trust. Conflict of interest there? And then second motive, which is delivered to us by the authors of that book, Doherty and McGregor. Here's what they suggest was the motive behind the war. Quotes, a small, socially advantaged group of English race patriots, that's Englishmen, backed by powerful industrialists and financiers in Britain and the US, caused World War I. No mention there of Germany, you'll have noticed. So their thesis, backed up with, well, you can be the judge when you read the book, but strong evidence, certainly copious evidence, is that the war was started by Anglo interests. Their objective being, and here I return to their words, to destroy Germany and take control of the world. Quite some book. Now, so we've had the financial motive. We've had the grab for power motive. There's a very different view coming from a journalist, Brian Friedenborg, fairly recently in 2018. This is what he says. The war was ruinous for all the major players, and still they perpetuated it. When confronted, he says, with a range of options, the belligerents often chose a horrible option when there were better ones available, and they often doubled down on the same or similar decisions despite repeated failure, continuing stalemate, and despite appalling loss of life. Now, he puts this all down to insanity. He thinks that the war was in the hands of people who are not quite of sane mind. But, you know, some people might suggest, and we showed some footage last week, some people might suggest that the whole war effort was a depopulation event designed to reduce the population, not just of Britain, but other nations taking part. And continuing with the theme of insanity and the horror of it all, of course, we could do no better than hear the voice of Wilfred Owen, the war poet who perished at the age of 25, his life cut short, like so many young men in that war. So here are some words from Wilfred Owen. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children, ardent for some desperate glory, the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori. How splendid it is to die for your country. That was written in 1917 to 18. And I was reading the preface that he wrote to a collection of his war poems. And it was clear that he intended that collection of poems as a warning to future generations, people like us. Here are his words again. This book is not about heroes, he wrote, nor is it about deeds or lands, nor anything about glory, honour, dominion or power, except war. Above all, this book is not concerned with poetry. The subject of it is war and the pity of war. The poetry is in the pity. Yet these elegies are not to this generation. This is in no sense consolatory. They may be to the next. All the poet can do today is to warn. And so I bring you his words tonight, to warn the reality of war. And he died in action on the Western Front, almost, here's the irony, a week to the hour before the armistice came into effect. And his mother received notification of his death on Armistice Day as her local church bells were ringing in celebration. Can you imagine what his mother felt? And a British baby born at exactly 11 a.m. on Armistice Day was christened Pax. At the age of 21, he would be killed in the next war. And incidentally, many of you will be aware that the armistice was declared at 11 a.m. on the 11th of November, which is the 11th month in 1918. So that gives us 11, 11, 11. Why the obsession with the number 11? Was it pure chance? Was it a one-off? Or is there something more to this? Because if we search for other incidences of the number 11, the occurrences, it recurs in 9/11. It occurs even in, if you picture in your mind the Twin Towers, two figures representing 1 and 1. It was the start time of King Charles's coronation. That started at 11 a.m. In the last state opening of Parliament, that started at 11:25. And many of you may have noticed that the date of the next election, 4th of July, 4 plus 7 adds up to 11. And so, as you can see in the title of this slide, I hope you can see it, was this, as the journalist suggested, an act of insanity, or was it an act of malign design? And we need to keep trying to warn, like the valiant Wilfred Owen. And particularly in this short period we have of a few weeks before the election on the 4th of July, warn people that the drums of war are beating, that the mainstream parties are not revealing this to the public. Reveal that very likely, and you can be the judge when we look at the manifestos, all the mainstream parties are pro-war. And if people do not want to put their children or spouses aged 18 to 50 at risk, perhaps they should consider those candidates who may be independent, who may not support violence. Of course, there's a job to be done to gather information, and one of the things that we would urge you to do is to approach any independent candidates that you're aware of and seek their views on this issue of war. And then please feed this back to us, and then we can put it up on the campaign website. Let me just give you that name so that you can jot it down, and I'll give you an email address if you do that ferreting of information. The campaign website is winningwithoutwar, just remember 3 W's, .org, winningwithoutwar.org. And the email address, if you do find any information, is winningwithoutwar@proton.me. Nice and simple, winningwithoutwar@proton.me. And we need to warn people about the realities of war, not the propagandizing about war. No, the realities. And just to give you a taste this evening, because we haven't got that long, I'll begin with Smedley Butler. I don't think we can do better than start here. In 1935, he wrote his book, War is a Racket. You can access a free copy of that on the campaign website. He was very adept with words. He said that the profits of war are in dollars and the losses in lives. And the bill, well, that is shouldered by the public. And he even elaborates on the elements that are covered by the bill. Rather graphic. He said it covers newly placed gravestones, mangled bodies, shattered minds, broken hearts and homes, economic instability, depression and all its attendant miseries, and back-breaking taxation for generations and generations. Moving to these shores, we have our own George Orwell, most famous for his novel 1984, which portrays a dystopian society perpetually at war, which I think it's fair to say he presents as a device, a very conscious device on the part of Big Brother to keep people in line. And moving aside from that famous novel, 1984, he wrote some stirring words in a book review. And I'm just going to read these out from George Orwell. Here's what he says about war. War against a foreign country only happens when the moneyed classes think they are going to profit from it. That's interesting. It sort of backs up what Smedley Butler said. And Orwell wrote this review in 1937, so just 2 years after Smedley Butler's book. He goes on to say, every war when it comes, or before it comes, is represented not as a war, but as an act of self-defense against a homicidal maniac. Have we seen that before in conflicts? Are we seeing it now in the description of the enemy? Wait till we look at the manifestos. And finally, he says the essential job, this is the warning he is putting out to history. The essential job is to get people to recognize war propaganda when they see it. Eisenhower, of course, a five-star general in America and president at the end of the 1950s until 1961. Harsh words, hard-hitting words from Eisenhower about war. Here's what he said. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket launched signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending not just the money, it's spending the sweat of its labourers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. Very, very stirring words from Eisenhower. And if we move a few years on from that, back to these shores, Aldous Huxley. He wrote an essay, which I counsel if you haven't read it, entitled Propaganda in a Democratic Society, 1958. And he writes there that the world suffers from non-stop distraction and organised lying. What do you think of that phrase? Organised lying. He came up with that phrase 6 years before the phrase conspiracy theory emerged. There he is, talking about organised lying. And in this essay, which is Propaganda in a Democratic Society, which is part of a much larger essay, which is entitled Brave New World Revisited, he says that non-rational propaganda includes suspension of facts. And he describes that suspension of facts as a threat to Western democracy and individual liberty. And this is why he counsels that we must not have a suspension of facts and we must adopt rational thinking. His thesis is that if a society practices rational thinking, then tyranny will be kept at bay. But if a society practices non-rational thinking, then tyranny can flourish. So part of the aim of this campaign is to deal with the rational. And that's one of the things that draws me personally to it. As with perhaps many of you, we all enjoy working with the rational rather than the non-rational. So I'm now going to take you through some of the headlines from the manifestos of the 5 main parties, and my thanks for the work that's been done in being able to deliver this information to you tonight, very shortly after these manifestos have been published. So I'll whiz through this as quickly as possible. By the way, I put the logos of all the parties up on the slides, and they will look very beautiful, sort of natural themes, as if we're living in a sort of Eden, really. Does that match the words that we're about to hear? Here's some snippets from the Conservative Party manifesto as they relate to defence issues. I'm just quoting, these are not my words. In the next decade, we'll face challenges to our energy and national security, there we have it again, from foreign conflicts. They seem to be very confident of these things happening. They're going to give young people the skills and opportunities they deserve. Well, that sounds good enough, doesn't it? But then it goes on to say, well, that will be supplied through mandatory national service. Mandatory, I underscore, national service for all school leavers at 18, and that will last 12 months. And their objective is to boost defence spending to our new NATO standard of 2.5% of GDP by 2030, so we can protect British interests at home and abroad in an increasingly hostile world. Remember what Eisenhower said, do you remember, about taking away the genius of scientists, the hopes of children? This is money that could otherwise be spent for other causes. Going back to the manifesto, it refers to guaranteeing Ukraine the support it needs for the long haul, assuring current levels of support for as long as they are required. We will secure additional military supplies for Ukraine and build international agreement to use immobilized Russian assets to support Ukraine. And finally, there are references to the need for the nation to be prepared to tackle the axis of authoritarian states, such as Russia and China, who want to threaten international security. Those are just some snippets from an otherwise very long manifesto. Moving on swiftly, Labour. Well, this is an interesting campaign page. Announces our plan to change Britain. Now, many people reading that might think, oh, that must be positive. Well, just hang on there for a little bit. And if you dip into this referendum yourself, not referendum, manifesto, I beg your pardon, notice the extensive use of red, which signals something to me, and it may well signify something to you as well. Here's the manifesto from Labour. To maintain an unshakable commitment to NATO and our nuclear deterrent, I warn, listen to this, I warn people some of the decisions we will have to take will not be easy. I have reformed a public service before, the Crown Prosecution Service. I know how hard it is. So tough decisions. What could those tough decisions be? They're putting this in plain sight with all this red around it. And on more than one occasion, there are references to, quotes, tyrants like Putin. I don't know if that puts you in mind of some of the words of George Orwell that we heard earlier. And the logo, there I put it on the slide, it's a rather sad-looking rose, would you say? I don't know if you can see a face that looks rather cut up, but you may say that's an overactive imagination on my part. And then we move on. Well, I wish I could say that things were looking rosier at this point. This is an extract from the Lib Dem manifesto. And look at the lovely logo, a bird in flight. Quotes, a longer-term ambition is to increase regular troop numbers back to over 100,000, also maintaining the UK's support for NATO and increase defence spending with an ambition to spend at least 2.5% of GDP on defence. We've heard that just now from the Labour. And they say they will legislate to ensure there's a parliamentary vote before engaging in military action and supporting an intervention only when there is a clear legal or humanitarian case. And of course, who would be making that case? The Conservatives say one of the first things they will do is set up an inquiry and see where things stand. Now, this may sound fine and dandy. They'll only, they say, support intervention when there's a clear legal or humanitarian case. Is this a trusted pair of hands? Well, they go on to say that the UK must support democracies around the world, especially those threatened by aggression, such as Ukraine and Taiwan. We must stand up to states like China and Russia. So they're declaring, would say pretty clearly their intentions. And here's another quote: "We stand with the people of Ukraine and provide them with the support that they need in the face of Putin's illegal invasion." And so this leaves us with two parties, two of the five main parties. Reform, here's their logo, very dynamic looking with a rightward pointing arrow, and the campaign slogan, "Delivered in silence for maximum theatrical effect. Britain is broken. Britain needs reform." Touch of alliteration there. What does that actually mean? Well, they talk about increasing defence spending to 2.5% of national GDP by year 3. Have we heard this before? And then increasing it, this is something new, to 3% within 6 years. And they say that this will increase the size and capacity of our armed forces, ensuring our lead role in NATO. And then last, the Greens, again with a rather lovely logo, leaves, natural life. The Green Party, the manifesto says, wants to see the UK continue to support Ukraine as it resists Russian invasion. They go on to add something that isn't present in the others. To give them their due, they say that diplomacy and practical cooperation must always take precedence over military action. And they say that they want to see much greater emphasis on the alliance's efforts to encourage dialogue to support global peace building. Well, we must welcome that dialogue. I mean, of course, there are so many alternative solutions to the blunt and horrific instrument that is war. So it's good to hear them talk about dialogue. And they also say that NATO must act solely in defence of member states. So forgive the brevity, but we've a lot to do this evening. Have a look at those manifestos, judge them for yourself. See, reading between the lines, what you can detect as critical thinkers in this room. But going back to our campaign, Winning Without War, the main objectives of the campaign is to get this issue very much on the agenda as a pre-election issue, realise and disseminate the fact that war benefits only the few. And if you can, discover the intentions in relation to war where local candidates, independents, are concerned, or even from the mainstream parties. Please send us that information. There you have the email again, winningwithoutwar, this should be an at there, at proton.me. And finally, consider this strategy, helping to conduct informal exit polls in key wards. Because as things stand, we don't have an independent barometer of how people have voted. So we're very much at the mercy of the official count. So it wouldn't be difficult to carry out exit polls if we had 5 sessions in the course of a polling day, each session, say, 3 hours in length, and we had a group of, say, 10 people, that's all we need to man this unofficial exit poll. 10 people, 2 people in the first 3 hours, 2 people in the next, and very politely ask people if they're willing, when they exit the polling station, to give us an idea of their voting behaviour. And of course that doesn't include, I appreciate, the postal votes, but it will still give us something independent of the official count. So the message is really, as Robert said, get involved in so many ways in this very short period of time that we have. And it's wonderful that so many have come tonight. Help get the message out. help with the campaign. There's the email address again. Show that cries for war, as Gandhi said, are signs of weakness, not strength. And we must do all we can collectively to protect our men and women, because as we'll see when we hear Tim Davis speak to us, that it isn't just men whose lives would be at risk, but women as well, and both young and the not so young. So this is our campaign. Here's a poster from Katie Kollwitz in German, but with the translation, "War Never Again." Very, very powerful poster there. And this campaign is a leaderless campaign. There is no leader. It's everybody in the room and more if we can grow this campaign. And we'll all do what we can to assist with the campaign objectives. And our hope, taking our cue from Aldous Huxley in his Brave New World Revisited, is that we can encourage a rational approach to the information coming our way. And he said that with that, we can produce an earthly paradise. Those are his words. And so we need to make his vision concrete. He wrote those stirring words in 1958. And what we need are appeals to reason by means of logical arguments based on the best available evidence. Those are Aldous Huxley's words. And I've done a little bit to encourage critical thinking with this book. I wrote with Catherine Armitage. This isn't in any way to promote the book. It's just that critical thinking and rational thinking, as Aldous Huxley said, is the way out of a tyrannical situation wherever we find it on earth. This book that I wrote with Catherine Armitage is called Light Bulb Moments and the Power of Critical Thinking. And critical thinking is under attack, I think it's fair to say. In August 2022, the OECD undertook a study, included 800,000 people in the survey, new graduates, and their conclusion was that only 48% of those new graduates demonstrated critical thinking. Critical thinking is only mentioned in 2 subjects in the national curriculum. Would you believe it? Or maybe you would. And that is art and design and history. So let's get behind Aldous Huxley and approach this with appeals to reason, as he said. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.